The reason why riba has such an emphatic warning and prohibition is because it has a harmful effect upon the whole of society globally, right? And you see that today, right? Like we said, we're a G7 country here in the UK, but we've got hard-working British people that can't pay their energy bills, and there's a social class system that's been developed, right?
Welcome to another episode of the I Love Monday podcast. Today we have Omar Khaliel of Riba-Free Foundation. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Zaid. Really appreciate it. It's a privilege to be on the podcast.
I appreciate it. It's been a long time coming. So you're the founder of Riba-Free Foundation, which is a charity about educating and teaching people about interest and then how you're looking to combat that in the wider world. So we'll speak about how you started there, but tell us from the early stages of your career, your paper rounds, or if you did all of that, any of that.
Yeah, paper. I did a paper round. Once upon a time, I used to work 3 jobs. Literally, I did a social experiment. I thought, you know, if you work really, really, really hard, you'll get everything in life. As a young teenager, you know, you kind of go through life's phases to understand what is correct, you know, to have enough income to live comfortably. And I remember one stage of my life I was doing 3 jobs. So I think I worked in the local sports shop, Sports Direct. I did I don't know if you remember the Phones for You days, I worked there as well. Yeah. So I worked there in addition to doing a night shift in a security company. I quickly realized after about a week that it's not humanly possible to sustain that. And then, I've done a whole host of jobs, but I think the perspective for me when I was young was to get as much experience as possible from different walks of life to understand what I resonate with, but obviously income is important.
Why did you decide that at such a young age to get different types of experience?
I suppose at the time, when you're young, you have different ambitions, right? You're in school, you're still figuring out life, you want the best for your family. I suppose for me, the biggest thing was that I wanted to give my mother a comfortable life as possible. So that was my kind of real driving force. Mum and dad didn't really have to, because they sacrificed so many of their dreams and wants for their kids, right? Yeah. So it was about giving back. But little did I know that the world is not run like that, where you can just work and work and work. And also I think it taught me the biggest lesson. It's not about how hard you work, it's about how smart you work. So in that week, when did you actually sleep? Because if you're doing security during the night, and Sports Direct's probably in the morning. That's a very good question, actually. So one of my friends, he used to have a SIA license, and I said, look, I'm trying to earn some money at the moment. And he said, okay, I've got a site where they're building houses, right? You've got to do a night shift. So here I was, I'd take my TV in the night shift, keep myself awake, and you have to do patrols. One time I was so exhausted I actually fell asleep, and the manager came at 8 a.m. in the morning and found me sleeping. So I think he didn't say much, I just knew not to come back. But the point was I was so exhausted that when I was doing the night patrols, it was just very difficult to stay awake. I must have been like 15, 16 at the time, I can't remember the exact age, but you learn from that, right? And that's when I started to think, well, you know, the world's entrepreneurs, surely they can't think and work like this, right? They must think smarter than this, and they did. And as a young teenager, this is one of life's tough lessons you learn.
So a lot of your motivations were behind your parents. What kind of lessons did they teach you in terms of working and career and entrepreneurship? It's
a very good question, actually, because mum and dad, very different personalities, but from a father's perspective, obviously wanted to do really, really well. Mum was like, doesn't matter what you do, son, as long as you keep up your prayers, right? That was an underlying principle. So it doesn't matter what you do in life, this is secondary in nature to having your own identity when it comes to practicing your faith, having the confidence to practice your faith. So I think when we're young, especially Muslims being born in the West, we're sometimes, how do I say this? Sometimes we don't necessarily appreciate that we're born into a particular way of life, especially when it comes to practicing our own deen and our religion, right? Whereas sometimes you see reverts and they come in really headstrong and think, oh wow, these people are really, really exciting, and look at the passion, because it's kind of nurtured into us from a very different phase of life. And in some cases, we may not appreciate the true value of its fruits until we actually become older, understand what life was really like, and go through those trials and tribulations of life. Do you see what I mean? Where I'm sure where most people will resonate with this, that when you're going through a tough patch, this is the real time you lean in on your relationship with Allah and the deen and the principles that it encompasses.
So where you were brought up, was there like a Muslim community there as well to like push you and inspire you?
Yeah, I mean, again, I mean, I'm born and raised in High Wycombe. I did leave and live in the Middle East for almost 5 years of my life, so that was interesting. But High Wycombe probably comes from a mix of heavily dominated Muslim community from the Pakistani and Bangladeshi background, predominantly really Pakistani. Now it's a lot more diverse, but that was at that time High Wycombe was I think the first ever masjid in High Wycombe has been there for almost 40 years, maybe 40 years plus now. So it was one of the early ones, not the earliest ones, but one of the early ones. Now High Wycombe has over 8 different masjids.
Okay.
So one time everybody used to pray in that masjid, but as you'll be well aware, societies grow and evolve and different needs and wants. So that's why you've got different types of masjids, and we didn't need to go into those issues that where we can have certain different schools of thought, etc., etc. But yeah, predominantly it was a Pakistani background, and so you can imagine how those kind of masjids are run.
Do you mean is we have like East London, we have similar where we have so many different types of masjids. We're talking Gujarati, Pakistani, Bengali, Somali. We have lots of different types. But what obviously happens as times evolve, people are moving out, and a lot of their first inclination is to, okay, we need to establish a masjid in this area, and like that, this small patch of, for example, Forest Gate, Stratford, has now expanded all the way to as far and wide, because people are moving to different areas saying we need to build that community, because we had that as we were children, and it's helped because we had the 5 to 7 madrasa and everything. Certain areas don't have that, and they have it in a house or something, whereas they want that for their kids now. So we want a masjid where we can send our kids there and a similar upbringing, which I think helps and molds us as individuals.
Absolutely, I think that's a really, really good point. The point I was going to make regarding the difference between culture and religion, I was very, very fortunate. My parents, from a very young age, they said that you've got to draw the line where something is actually from the Quran and Sunnah in terms of directly from the religion, and something which comes from culture. Now we know certain terms of certain cultural practices. There's it's a custom, so it's accepted, right? However, where you've got to draw the line, and this is where I was very fortunate, because there was a lot of, I mean, without getting into the fiqh debates of, do you celebrate a birthday of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, for example, or Mawlid and other issues, right? Different masjids would have a different perspective, different scholars have a different perspective. But my mum was very clear, my father was very clear, he said, always separate the culture from the religion and go back to the source of the knowledge. And that actually made a huge difference for me, because also at a young age, I played a lot of football. Actually, if you ask me what my main dream was, it was to play in the Premier League, right? Didn't quite happen. But what I did manage to do through that is actually have the trajectory of understanding how that system works. So I played at the age of 8, 9, and at that time, you're talking about madrasas, I had no other Asian really doing it. So I was in a predominantly white background. High Wycombe is a very conservative area, right? So I was the only brown person going to these football clubs, playing, scoring, having my name in the paper, etc., etc. And learning as well, because I didn't really have any support. I had a lot of friends from the kind of like black community, Caribbean, St. Vincent, and they kind of took me under the wing, and that's how I really upskilled my kind of football careers. I was surrounded by people at the age of 8, 9 were being scouted by Southampton, etc., etc. So rather than my parents saying, actually, you've got to go madrasa, no football, my father, for example, he hates football. He absolutely hates it, right? He would come every Sunday, every Saturday, without fail, in the sleet snow to watch me. And that meant the world to me. So from a young age, may Allah subhanahu wa my parents, I had that support in so many different facets of life. And ultimately, without that support, I wouldn't be where I am today.
What was your first proper job?
My first
9 to 5, or whatever you want to call it.
An official job, okay, so not the paper round. My first job, that's a good question. I've done so many, I can't actually remember what the first one was. So it would have possibly been Phones for You. And I don't know if the viewers of this podcast remember Phones for You. It's no longer in operation, it's gone out of business. But most town centres did have a Phones for You branch where they would sell most of the mobile phone contract that you had. Remember, they sold all the contracts and they had loads of cashback deals, etc., etc. But that was my first real 9 to 5 job.
And then, how did you find that 9 to 5? Because obviously you're not doing 9 to 5 anymore. So how did you find that 9 to 5?
So at that time I was started in and out studies. Well, actually, no, that's a correction. So that was my second job. The first one was Sports Direct, the Sports Direct job. That was my first job. And I got that quite early as soon as I turned 16. Then Phones for You. What had happened was when I was doing that, I added Phones for You to the list. And then they were the two that I maintained. And then I left Sports Direct and went into Phones for You. But yeah, Phones for You was the actual full 9 to 5 full-time role in the summer from coming back from the studies. And it was good because there was in fact last night we had a catch up with our old Phones for You reunion as such in locally. So there was a chap who had employed me, who I'm still in touch to this day. We had a really, really good team in Phones for You at that particular time. But it really taught me some really, again, valuable life principles. If you really wanted to learn how to sell, that was a phenomenal business to be in, because the area manager would come around at the end of the day, and if you hadn't hit target, he would literally say, go and work for McDonald's. So it was a high pressure sales environment. Everybody was competing one another to sell the contracts. There was a lot of commission based on those contracts. We used to be right next to an O2 store, by the way. And we were selling O2 contracts, so you can imagine.
It's true, actually. A lot of people say if you want to learn sales, go into these commission-based sales roles. Carphone Warehouse is another one. A lot of people used to work in Carphone
they were a
Warehouse.
direct competitor, yeah.
So when did entrepreneurship first come to you?
That's a very good question. I think about that very deeply, because if we look at the forefront of how our religion was set up economically in Medina and Munawwara, entrepreneurship played a key role, right? So I think historically, from the history of Islam and the Khulafa, you'll see there's a massive need for entrepreneurship. Now, probably brings me to a juncture within this exchange that we're having to talk about money, right? Sometimes you grow up and people say, they'll say this saying, money is the root of all evil.
Yeah,
right.
You hear that in Jummah khutbahs a lot.
Yeah, we still? Wow. See, this it just goes to show how we do not understand the role of money in society, right?
In fact, money is the root of all evil, and we also need £1,000 to pay the next month's rent.
Well, there you go, right? Money is a tool for economic empowerment, right? And money is not the root of all evil. It's what you do with it which empowers not only your own life, your family's life, and also the people within your community and the wider community, right? And I think from an Islamic perspective, right, the Islamic economic structure, we've got to stop pigeonholing it into just for Muslims. Islam is a way of life for absolutely everything, and it's supposed to be fair and equitable, and it should have the correct level of economic impact on everyone's lives. That's the key point.
What do you mean by that? So what do you mean by utilizing money the correct way and empowering using money? Yeah, so for example, let's go back. Like I said, money is the root of all evil, like you just said, right? Without money, you can't pay your electricity bills. Without money, you can't pay your school. You can't buy a car to take your children to school. Without money, you can't live in security, etc., etc., etc. Right? So we all know that we need money, right? And I think the misconception comes is when you have excess money or you have abundant wealth, right? What do you do with it? So let's go back to first principles. Uthman radiallahu anhu, Abdurrahman ibn Auf radiallahu anhu, even the prominent Sahaba. Okay, those two are the well-known ones because they were extremely wealthy. You had Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, Umar radiallahu anhu. They were all very, very prominent traders, right? So they all were entrepreneurs, some more successful than others, right? It's just that the two prominent Sahaba that we know affiliated with money, what did they do? They helped build infrastructure, right? They helped fund waqfs. They helped fund public things like buying the well of Roman for the inhabitants of the community. Do you see what I mean? So when we're talking about money and finance, what we're talking about is, well, first understanding that it's a facilitator to make someone's life better and the community's life better. So, how does it play a role in funding SMEs, right? Which is the lifeblood of any economy. How does it make the education system better, make sure everybody has access to education? How do we have good infrastructure where we live?
trains, right? And it ties into what's happening with the economic situation right now, where this country, some people say, is falling apart, right? Their healthcare is not working, right? Functioning properly. It's the money's being dried out, right? The trains are not working on time. They can't get anything right. Hard-working people can't pay their energy bills, right? This riba-based economic structure is making the gap between rich and poor even wider. So we've got to understand that money is a tool, and we want to make sure that we use it and we spread wealth within an economy equitably, right? Make sure it's circling, not being sat there hoarded by the rich.
What do you mean by circling?
Well, we'll come on to that when we talk about the RFF, the circular economy. But coming back to the point, right? Money is a tool for economic empowerment, and these are just some of the examples that I've given. But it's what you choose to do with it, right? Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us really, really good examples in the Quran. Now, let's detach from a secular religious perspective, right? And talk about the life lesson that the Quran teaches you, right? Many a time in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about trade and tijara and transaction and making good decisions, etc., right? Because ultimately, the Sharia, the legal framework of what Allah is telling us to do is for our benefit, right? It's about decision making. So, for example, when it comes to money, he says, don't be a spendthrift, right? The spendthrifts are no doubt the allies of the shayateen, right? What does that mean? For example, if you've been blessed with abundant wealth, we also have the institution of zakat and charity and sadaqah, right? Which is no doubt linked to spending. But if your neighbour's hasn't got bread at night, hasn't got a roof over your head, how can you sleep at night knowing that he hasn't, right? If you've got a family member that's struggling and you've been given excess wealth, how can you know that you're, living comfortably, but he's not, right? So remember, I think, from an Islamic perspective, we realize that for a Muslim, for a believer, the wealth doesn't actually belong to us. This is a really, really key point. And I think it's very easy, especially with people that are really, really wealthy and that may not understand these principles of their deen, that if we do somehow think that wealth is ours, right, we treat it as such. But we know that that's not the case, because ultimately everything belongs to Allah. When you develop that kind of mindset and mind frame, you will start to do different things with your money. Do you see what I mean? When you know ultimately it doesn't belong to you and you're a custodian and a manager of wealth, I think everybody should treat themselves as a fund manager for their wealth.
So touching on that and then moving to Islamic finance, because it all ties in. And I'm not talking about Gatehouse, Al Rayyan, just the general structure that Islamic finance economy should have. What is it? Because you have got a good background in Islamic finance as well.
So it's just a couple of principles of the Islamic economic structure, let's just say, not so much Islamic finance, because we'll talk about the RFF and Islamic finance in general. But let's just take, for example, the Islamic economic structure. So that economic structure, first of all, wants money to be circulated within an economy. Okay, that's really, really important, right? And for money to circulate effectively, what we don't need is people sat on wealth hoarding it, right? Because when you're hoarding wealth, it's not circulating, right? Okay, fine. We can take many examples in this current day and age, right? We live in a highly entrenched riba-based economic structure, right? Globally, and that's problematic. And we have specific ayahs that in the Quran that relate to how harmful that is for society. But some other principles the economic framework that Islam endorses is, for example, having a pro-investment culture, right? Investing your wealth, equity sharing, making sure that the pie is big enough for everybody to eat, making sure you have equitably sharing that wealth whilst growing it with other people, right? With equal risk and reward. So these are some principles of the economic structure. And you'll find that, for example, the pie being big enough, you could be setting up a business, right? And you may not have the financing, and you go to a brother or sister that has the financing, right? And you say, actually, do you know what? Why don't you invest in my business, right? And as I grow, you'll grow, so I'll give you some equity, right? Whereas the bank gives you an interest-bearing loan, and they profit regardless of your success or failure, which is not a fair transaction. Do you see what I mean? So that's why the risk and reward should be shared. So, for example, that's why equity sharing, rather than as opposed to debt, is what Islam promotes, rather than the other way around. So I think these are important principles to understand, right? And I know a lot of our youngsters now are looking into Islamic finance from a very positive mindset, which is very encouraging.
So Omar, tell us about your journey in Islamic finance.
Yeah, good question. My journey to Islamic finance, it actually started when I actually moved to the Middle East, because that was my first real exposure to Islamic banks as such, and Islamic finance in general. So when I moved to the Middle East back in 2013, it's the first time I started using Islamic bank, and obviously I myself come from a finance background, so I thought predominantly, this is interesting. How do these institutions operate, right? Because we don't really. In the past within the UK, we've had institutions like HSBC introduced HSBC Amana, and then we previously had the IBB, which is now Al Rayyan Bank. Choice is very limited for Muslims, right? So in the UAE, for example, where I was based in Dubai, you've got so many different Islamic banks, right? Obviously, still working in a conventional system, but you have, for example, Abu Dhabi Islamic Bank, DIB, First Gulf Bank, which have Islamic windows, Emirates NBD, which have Emirates Islamic, etc., etc. So you've got choice there, and they're fully fledged banks where they have their own Sharia board, etc., etc. So I remember when I first got my my visa to work there, and the banking license had come through for myself personally. I quickly switched from HSBC to, I think it was ADIB at the time, and then I switched to DIB. But they obviously have a different philosophy on how banking should be done. The products are structured differently as well. And at the time, I was used to study in Dubai as well. So I used to study at the South African Islamic Centre, which is a phenomenal institution, and I'm still in touch with my teachers there now. In fact, I was there last month when I was there we had a round table at COP for the RFF, and it's a remarkable institution. That actually was a turning point for me, because had I not studied there, I wouldn't have met certain friends of mine that had kind of paved the way for me to understand Islamic finance. So one of them was Mohammed Pracha, who most people know is the managing partner of Norton Rose, who I used to study with and is now a very dear friend. And he at the time was one of the world, if not the world's top Islamic finance lawyer. So once I realised what he did and who he was, I was harassing him with questions and picking his brain on many things. And so he kindly, unconditionally helped me meet some other practitioners in the industry. And obviously in that circle as well, you quickly realise that Islamic finance is a very small industry, and you can quickly understand who else there is. And another one I met out there was Haris Irfan, who obviously wrote that famous book on Heaven's Bankers, Islamic finance, right? So he's another chap that I met back in Dubai, and he's done a very famous podcast with the brother Muhammad Jalal from the Thinking Muslim podcast, who's talked about his journey there as well. So these are the kind of people that I was kind of learning off and understanding how the industry works. So that was my first foray into Islamic finance. And then I moved back to the UK in 2018, and I wanted to continue my studies. We started studying through IFG. So IFG at the time did a 2-year course, which was called the Majella. We were the first cohort. And to cut a long story short, we were like one of their social experiments that happened. And as I like to always think that when we're going to do something, when social experiments do happen, we don't want to make it hypothetical. And they'd given us a task to first of all, we had the opportunity to study the fiqh of Islamic finance, and then after studying that fiqh, how we can put that into practice in the real world, right? So they would set a task at the end of 2 years for you to graduate, to say that now we've taught you this information, now go and prove that you have understood it. And we all had to come up with a project. Now, what had happened in the process, there was probably about 10 of us at that time, clearly identified that one of the fundamental issues is riba, right? There's no doubt about it. And because we'd spent 2 years learning from first principles what riba is from the Quran and Sunnah, what harm it has upon society, for example, we were quickly able to identify that being the fundamental issue, and how we were then going to put our projects together. And what we decided was to do our individual projects. I was also, through my history, not in my professional experience, but my personal experience of studying the deen, then going through corporate working experience, quickly realised that the focus on entrepreneurship is very, very key, as I mentioned earlier. But also, if the Muslim Ummah was going to come out of its economic plight that it's currently in, that they have to find a different way. And we've realised that riba, the education was lacking, because it took us a little while to understand it. If that's how long it took us, imagine what it's going to be like for everybody else. So we quickly identified that there's a lack of education regarding riba and finance in general. So that, just in a nutshell, that was the kind of my journey into Islamic finance, then coming to how RFF was quickly formed.
Okay, so you said it took you quite a while and the students quite a while to understand exactly what riba is. So what is riba in a nutshell for the layman?
So good question, and I think the best way to explain riba, because there are different types and forms of riba and different guises of riba, is because we all know it through, the transaction and the structure of a loan, right? And we know it through banking, and I'll come on to how banking plays a role within Islamic finance, because the first thing to say from the outset, Islamic finance does not equal Islamic banking, right? Banking is just a part of Islamic finance. Islamic finance is way broader than that. But the fundamental question of what is riba, that's a very good question, because I literally been going around the country for the last 2-3 years asking people this question, and I always get a different answer. And it highlights the fact that we have that lack of understanding. So the best way to explain it is money earned on money lent at a particular rate. Okay? Any excess is riba. So for example, Zaid, if you said to me that you need to borrow $100, right? Or £100. And I say to you, okay, no problem, I will give you that $100, and that's it. That's the end of the transaction. So you asked for 100, I give you 100. Now, there's nothing wrong with that transaction. In fact, that transaction, as we know, is a qard hasan, right? It's a goodly loan. It's a straight loan. However, if you ask for that £100 and I said, okay, I will give you that £100, but you've got to give me £110 in return, right? That automatically becomes riba, right? Let's say, for example, I said, okay, do you know what? I'll give you the £100, but I just want 1 penny. So you give me £100 and 1 pence, still riba. It doesn't matter if it's an inch or a mile, riba is riba, right? And where does the prohibition come from? The prohibition comes from one of the most emphatic ayahs in the Quran, right? And this is something to understand, where a lot of people, they get a little bit confused in terms of what is the purpose of riba, but what's the deep-rooting meaning? Well, first of all, as believers, whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to do, we follow, we hear and obey, right? So, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran that غَضِبَ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam declare war against riba, right? And so that particular ayah, when it came, was towards the end of the Rasul's life, in terms of when he was delivering the Hajj khutbah. And at that particular time, he said that anybody who partakes in riba, you may retain your principal, but don't claim the excess. Do you see what I mean? So whether it's a penny or a £10 or £100, money upon money is not permissible in Islam. And you'll see the economic effect of that, because if the rich were able to earn by just having mere money, it just makes that wide between rich and poor even wider, which is not one of the intended outcomes of a fair economic system.
So while I was researching about RFF, and I was just generally thinking, you mentioned the ayah and about how dealing with interest, Allah wages war on people who deal with interest. That if you look at the punishment for that, and then you look at the punishment for murder, adultery, gambling, these things which we see as these are sins that if someone does will shun them from community, whereas we know how big a part riba plays in our community. Yeah. I know you're not a scholar, so I'm not going to say what's the reason behind it, but in your opinion, because I'll give you my opinion. My opinion is that riba affects the global economy.
Of course.
A murder maybe would affect, it can affect the global economy if you look at mass murder, but a murder of 1-2 people affects a community. So my reasoning is the effect riba has compared to the other sins which we see as larger sins or much more major sins. That's why that punishment is so powerful and for riba.
So no, it's a very good point, and I actually teach this particular principle when I'm doing my financial literacy training that I offer, especially to the youth. No, it's a very key point, and this is in fact this is a point that when you're teaching people that don't predominantly follow a faith or are not followers of the Islamic faith, right? It's actually it's mind-boggling for them to digest, but they really relate with it, right? So why is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave a declaration of war against riba, but not a declaration of war against murder, theft, rape, right? And you're 100% spot on. You proposed the correct answer there, in the sense that the reason why riba has such an emphatic warning and prohibition is because it has a harmful effect upon the whole of society globally, right? And you see that today, right? Like we said, we're a G7 country here in the UK, but we've got hard-working British people that can't pay their energy bills. There's a social class system that's been developed, right? There's an elitist mentality, right? There's one rule for one part of society, and not so fair and equitable for the other. So I think that is highly problematic on so many different folds, right? What does it do? What does that filter down to in a social level, right? Riba has destroyed people's lives. Riba has destroyed people's marriages. People that can't get an income, or that are enslaved by debt for a mortgage, right? And they lose their job, they can't pay their mortgage. Marriages are falling apart, right? So there's so many different guises of riba, and that's just one example, right? Businesses are falling apart because of riba, right? And there's so many other examples. But the fundamental principle is, like you mentioned, if a murder does take place, obviously that's a heinous crime, that's an evil crime, right? But say, for example, it takes place in one part of London, it's not going to affect somebody that lives in a different part of the world. Riba does, unfortunately, right? And this highly capitalistic kind of greedy mentality that we live in now has spread worldwide like a wildfire. Do you see what I mean? So even if we give the example of an interest-bearing loan, like I said, from the initial principles of understanding what form the contract in Islam, this is something really important to understand, for you to understand how the riba takes place. So, for example, there must be four things that are present in a contract. That should be two parties, a subject matter, a price, and an agreement, right? But obviously within that, you can't have any agreements that take place where you have money upon lending, right? Money for money lending. So, for example, you go to the bank and you take a loan, you start a business, right? If your business goes bankrupt, right, that bank still claims the interest on the loan and the loan itself, right? Do you see what I mean? That's not a fair structure, because this is why Islam promotes an equitable structure, right? So your risk and reward should be shared. So when you're investing in underlying activities such as a business or something like that, if the business does well, some people could say on the flip side, it's not fair on the bank either to have this structure. So it exposes both sides, right? Where it should be equitable. So if the business does really well and they've taken a 30 grand loan and that's worth 50 million, right? That's also not fair. So it exposes both sides of that transaction being unjust. Do you see what I mean?
No, of course. And there's also the other element. Now, there's a lot of Muslim entrepreneurs who I've heard firsthand and secondhand, they say, and I'm talking about 8-9 figure multimillionaires, they will say that the moment I touch interest, all of this is long gone. But they claim their success is because they haven't touched interest.
This is a very key point. In fact, this is my own caveat, and I can tell you something very, very clear from my own observation, right? And and we'll come on in a second in terms of what the strategic purpose for the RFF is. Everybody that everybody that I've seen that has ventured down the route of avoiding riba, I suppose sometimes it's logical, right? Because anybody who's avoiding riba is doing it for prophetic principles, right? In terms of because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made this prohibition very clear. I've just seen so much barakah in their life, honestly. Sometimes in a manner which is not logical, by the way, right? Because this is why we believe, this is why we have iman. Because remember, Inna Allah ala kulli shayin qadir. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is able to do all things, right? If we firmly believe that and we stay within the boundaries of Sharia, it's a really key route to success. However, when we don't stay within the boundaries of Sharia and we go down that route and make excuses for partaking in riba, honestly, most people that I've seen go down this route has led to a lot of destruction or increased trials and tribulations. And look, that's just my own personal observation. And from the RFF perspective, we are building case studies because there have been some phenomenal examples of people that stayed away from riba. And if you speak to those people themselves, they'll tell you themselves firsthand that actually, do you know what, I don't know where this wealth has come from, But I just know that I stayed away from riba, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put barakah in my rizq. That's it. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? So I think that's a really, really key point to understand. Coming back to the emphasis of who owns the wealth, who does it belong to, right? Because remember, there's a hadith that Rasulullah says, rizq follows you like death. When we change the mindset on money, when we change the mindset of how these things work and how they play out, then it changes our whole philosophy on money and finance.
So then, why, like through your experience, why do you see so many people indulging in interest as opposed to staying away from it? Do you think it's just our community, because obviously we're based in a very interest-based banking world?
So look, the first thing to say on that point, and thank you for asking that question, because I'm nobody to judge, number one, right? I consider myself a student of knowledge until I, depart this world, because I think that's really, really important. That's something I've really started to appreciate as I got later in my life, that we never stop learning, right? And I'm certainly at the feet of the scholars always learning, right? And I think that's really, really important. Now, for all the people that have I've got many friends that have taken a mortgage very painfully. Not because they wanted to, because they felt there was no other opportunity, or their marriage was going to fall apart, or they got no structure for their children, or having some sort of security. Now, at the end of the day, they're on their own personal journeys, and that was just my observation I shared with you. However, I certainly sympathise with the people that have gone down that route, because you could argue our ancestors that came to this country, they didn't really know too much about riba, but they've built the masjids, for example. They built infrastructure for us. They worked really hard in the Industrial Revolution to put Muslim wealth on the map. Do you see what I mean? So I'm by no means pointing the finger. I think the organisation that we run is to help here assist, change the direction, offer more, not direct product services, but create a platform for more products and services that are riba-free to emerge and take us out of this conundrum that we live in right now. Do you see what I mean? Because I think everybody's clear that they don't want to be partaking in riba. Some, unfortunately, their circumstances don't permit. Do you see what I mean? So I think it's a really, really key part is that even if we are doing it, a lot of people, for example, cleanse the riba, and this is a service that we offer through the RFF, for example, right? Where they know that they've got some riba, they take it out, they don't keep it. Just a little bit like haram, like somebody has haram income, he's got to cleanse it out of the business, for example. Do you see what I mean? So I think it's a difficult one, and I'm not here to judge, but I certainly sympathise with them. But it highlights a bigger issue, right? And this is why the RFF came back to exist, right? If you look at the trajectory of the existing product services that were out there for the last 20, 30 years, Islamic finance, dare I even call it that, right? Finance in general was not serving grassroots, hard-working people that it was supposed to be serving. Because remember, people that have money and wealth, they are able to grow their wealth in an unjust means, right? By just giving out loans, interest-bearing loans, i.e. financial institutions. And so therefore, there's not actually a vast variety of choice for Muslims, right? Right now, for example, a Muslim that wants to open a business, where does he go? If he doesn't go for the initial seed capital, he goes to family, he goes to friends, he goes to his parents, right? He can't go to an institution. Why? Because they're offering interest-bearing loans. And the ones that they've had to do it very painfully, because they realize actually if I don't grow my wealth, there's many people that run successful businesses that unfortunately have partaken in riba, have made such a positive contribution to society for the Muslim Ummah as well. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that's important to know. What we want to get to a position of is that educating them on riba, right? So coming into the RFF, why does the RFF exist? Number one, we realised that education of riba is lacking, right? Why is that, right? You cannot teach riba until you understand finance. The world's 67% of the world's population is financially illiterate. Do you see what I mean? That's a stark statistics. And then this is why you'll probably hear me say this a lot, right? And I sound like a broken record, that why is finance not taught in schools, right? If English, maths and science are core subject matters that we cannot shroud ourselves away from, right? The schooling structure, the curriculum is set up in that manner. Why is finance not within those three subject matters? Because for me, finance is the most critical subject matter, right? So there's nothing more important. So I think the education is really, really key, and how we nurture that education in a welcoming, open manner rather than pointing fingers.
No, of course. And there's a lot of people that I know as well, like my generation, where the older generation were involved. They've in riba in terms of they bought houses because, like I said, they didn't have any other choice.
Yeah.
And the younger generation are more like, let's find a way to cleanse the riba. But that's not the word used. I'm just using it because you've used it. But basically get their houses away from riba in whichever means they can, just because there's more barakah. And I've seen people do that.
Yeah.
Literally, there was someone I knew who paid off his mortgage. And a week after, he called me. He said, do you know what? Since I paid it off that 1 week, there's just been so much barakah in my money. Straight away. And like they feel it straight away. And I think also it's like a burden lifted off, whether you feel it or not, because it's a stress as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
But going back to cleansing, how do you cleanse? Could you just expand on that?
Yeah, so currently what you'll find, so it's interesting because after consultation with the industry and the key stakeholders, the RFF does many things. And so currently when somebody does have riba, what they're saying is, and just to explain this decision, right, because it sometimes confuses a lot of people. When we're saying, so for example, if you have a savings account with a conventional bank or a bank account with a conventional bank, that earns interest.
Yeah.
Okay? And the reason why conventional banks love Muslims as customers is Muslims generally let the bank keep that additional money. So it just keeps feeding the riba beast, and it is a big beast, right? We're talking billions, right? And so what we're saying, actually, you've got a choice, right, as a Muslim. Number one, you can allow the bank, because you forego your riba, right? You can't take that, right? So you can allow the bank to keep your riba, therefore adding more fuel to the fire, right? Or what you can do is you can strip that riba out of the system. Now, in the grand scheme of things, probably won't make a massive difference, but there's over 4 million Muslims in the UK, right? And there's a lot of ethical people in this country as well. Do you see what I mean? So, if you strip that out of the system, you got potentially millions, if not billions, that as being stripped out of the system can be separated and can be used due to the issue of darura. Some scholars have said you can put it towards certain costs. Do you see what I mean?
Like the toilets of a masjid, etc.
Sorry?
Like the toilets of a masjid.
Yeah, not even so much the toilets. Maybe paying some operational expenditure within businesses or charities or HMRC tax bills or whatever it may be. But it can be used for certain things due to this issue because we don't have many solutions, right? But yeah, I think it's important. It's really, really important, that point that you made, that we do understand what is going on. And so therefore you have a decision, let the bank keep it or take it out. So this is the part where people get confused. Actually, you want me to take my riba out and use it and give it to a charity? Yes, we do, because we're asking you to take it out of the system. Do you see what I mean? So what the RFF does, we have a separate allocated bank account purely for those riba funds. And then we basically go in the direction of the scholars, right? Because this needs scholarly intervention, and they will endorse whether you can spend that money, what you can spend it on. And one of the underlying principles from the scholars is that as long as you don't benefit it from yourself directly, it can be used towards certain costs. But again, I leave that conversation with the scholars because we don't make any decisions without.
Okay, so moving on to RFF, Riba-Free Foundation. Was that your project after you finished your 2 years at IFG?
So yeah, so the group of us, there was around 10 of us, right? So I can't take credit because so one thing I will say is that developing a responsible chamber of commerce. Now, what do I mean by that? A responsible chamber of commerce where we have a circular economy that is contributing to the correct businesses that are ethical and responsible in nature in the first place. Right? You can see what's happening around the world today where the Muslim circular economy has a lot of leakage, right? It's not watertight. In fact, I could argue there may not even be one because the sad reality is very simple. As Muslims, right, we have money, we have wealth, we have personnel, we have skills, we have talent, we have resources, right? We literally have every single ingredient, but we can't make the correct curry. We can't make the correct, the dish to eat. And what I mean by that is strategic collaboration. And because we analysed that, the 10 of us that were doing it, and we realised that the fundamental issue of riba, what we want to do is develop, my vision has always been, my project was to develop the responsible chamber of commerce. And there were some other brothers that also had a similar vision. So we said, okay, do you know what? Let's do our individual projects, which all was respective, they were filling respective gaps within the ecosystem, right? And we said, we'll collectively work on this one. I went to work on this one straight away, right? And I made a commitment to myself that this is my calling ultimately, right? All my life, I wanted to be a professional footballer. That didn't happen. Just to give you an example, I was so obsessed with becoming a professional footballer that I made istikhara, right? And then after that, that was my closure. And then I was searching for what is my purpose in terms of life, right? How to make things better for people. And this was my vision, this was my passion. And now, never in my wildest dreams would I have thought that I would be doing just that. So just before our studies were about to finish, I went to work on this by just asking people what is riba and doing the validation of the organisation if there was any real substance. And that's how RFF was formed. So there's about 10 of us that did it, and we still meet regularly to discuss the strategic vision. And so ultimately what we want to be is we want to be the gel that brings the ummah together from an economic perspective, right? And our three main commercial outreaches right now are business, charities, and places of worship, right? All three have their underlying issues, but the point was the RFF wants to make that curry to make sure that we're all in sync, working with all those resources, those ni'mas that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with, because what we see, there was a really, really profound quote I saw the other day, and it read, "For evil to triumph, all it requires is good people to do nothing." And for me, the underlying issue is that we have a beautiful way of life because we as an ummah have not been fulfilling our requirements, right, on an individual level, and therefore we don't see it on a collective level, and that therefore harms society, because Islam is the only religion that has a fully fledged economic structure, right? I don't believe any other religion has this, where it ensures the rights of everybody are fulfilled. And if you look through history, it's done this absolutely. Do you see what I mean? So it's remarkable what it can offer. And I think the vision is now for the RFF is to articulate the value of this kind of finance, where it's more equitable, equity sharing, risk and reward, and how it impacts people's lives. Because if you look at this country right now, massive, the global debt is just going up and up and up, and it's not coming down. How are they going to pay for all this stuff, right? They've still got to pay for a pandemic. So it's not sustainable. And
you touched on the circular economy as something I like to call the Muslim pound.
Yeah.
What would you define the Muslim pound or the circular economy? Because so we have Jewish clients, and some of them, to be honest, what we realized, a lot of them came to us in the pandemic.
Yeah.
When there was just a problem everywhere. But whenever we say, okay, you need your gas certificate, you need a gas safe engineer, you need an electrician, even if a Jewish electrician charges double, they will go with a Jewish electrician. Whereas on my side, we would charge £60 for a gas certificate, Muslim landlord, Muslim owner. To some of them we know, family, friends, we say, okay, £40. You know what they'll say to us? Could have got it done for 25.
Got it cheaper, yeah, of course, yeah.
And it's a complete flip. And it's not a supporting of Muslim businesses, but it's also that money is not going around as it should be. Because that Muslim landlord, he's got money to pay. He would pay, for example, 2.5% to Foxtons. They wouldn't pay 1% to us for whatever reason. And we've seen that. So we've seen that across the board.
So I think this is a very good question and a very good point that you're highlighting. And it's a sad reality. I'll tell you why, because it just highlights the mindset that we have towards money, unfortunately. In fact, on that point, let me give you a hadith of Rasulullah. He said that, many a time he would overpay for something, right? So for example, if something costs a certain amount, right, he would specifically overpay for it for many reasons, because he felt that the person was giving himself true worth, right? Maybe he was doing it cheaper when he didn't need to. But he would do that consistently, right? And I know there's some brothers that do that, but unfortunately we have a very bad mindset when it comes to money. That's the problem. That's the underlying problem. We don't actually understand money. We don't understand barakah. Do you see what I mean? So you're talking about a circular economy. Okay. A circular economy is where they have a fully fledged economy where money circulates, and that pound circulates over and over and over a certain amount of times. Whereas if you look at the Muslim circular economy, it's actually, there's more money leaving the Muslim circular economy and going to other circular economies. And they give a really good example of the Jewish circular economy. Actually, this is something to talk about and highlight very well. So if you look at the Jewish circular economy, there's a saying amongst the Jews, you know, when they set up one business, they set up 5 in one go. What does that mean? So for example, somebody sets up a business, he knows that he's going to need an accountant. He knows he's going to need a lawyer, right? He knows he's going to need some sort of service-based engineer. He may need, you know, a supply chain, direct materials, resources, whatever. So what he does, all those needs that he has, he finds somebody within this Jewish community to say, go on, set up a business for this regard, and I'll come and trade with you. And by that, what they're doing is they're expanding their own wealth, circulating their wealth amongst one another. And here's the key point, right? They're empowering everyone, each one of those people within that chain of circular economy. Do you see what I mean? Whereas unfortunately, us Muslims, and it pains me to say this right now in terms of what's happening within our circular economy, we don't have that vision. Do you see what I mean? Dare I say, in some certain instances, like you highlighted, right? We just want the cheapest option. We don't look at the quality. We don't look at how much hard effort that person's put into that business to give him his due right. And this is the point that Rasulullah was highlighting, that, you know, just because somebody has real value and he may give you a discount, whatever, fulfill the rights. Do you see what I mean? Because this is why you want money circulating and empowering people's life. The pie is big enough, but our greed and our egos get in the way, unfortunately, which go against every prophetic characteristic that we know. So that's why we ask ourselves, if good people are not standing up for what they believe in, right, in terms of promoting the Quran and Sunnah, our way of life, how are we going to be serving humanity? Do you see what I mean? So I think there's a lack of knowledge in terms of our own Islamic principles.
So I'm seeing a lot of Muslim to Muslim businesses now, both on a high income generating or just as a community project, such as Amazing is one that always comes to mind because they're just a Muslim business directory. Then you've got Muslim Amir, who targets Muslims for leadership. That's Osama, who's actually introduced us.
Yeah.
IFG is another one, FIDA is another one, Kestrel is another one. So we're seeing a change. But how do you see this leakage, or how can this leakage be stopped and to be a full circle? Because for me, as Muslim pounds, you've got a customer pays, goes to Muslim grocery shop, that supplier goes to Muslim suppliers. Eventually that money trickles down, it goes into sadaqah, and zakat, which then invests in the infrastructure, which then booms their Muslim Islamic economy. But how that leakage, how do we stop it?
So it's a really good point and really good question. I think before we come back to the leakages and what constitutes a circular economy in terms of, I mean, you've highlighted it, right? Ultimately, what's the purpose? How far can your pound go until it keeps flowing and flowing, and before it nestles into somebody's lap as zakat or sadaqah or whatever it may be, right? A really, really good example to give is in the time of Umar radiallahu anhu, when he was the Amir al-Mu'mineen. He had distributed wealth so far and wide that it actually became very difficult to find a recipient of zakat, right? So I think we have a clear vision and model that we can follow. It's just actually following it. It's as simple as that, just following it, right? And the key point is this, the really, really key point, right? It applies so much for the RFF and in general, is that hold on to the rope of Allah and do not become divided, right? Muslim Ummah ultimately should stand on truth and haqq, right? Once it does that, then it will have its intended level of economic impact as well as societal. Do you see what I mean? So when the Muslim Ummah is divided, not having this collaborative mindset, this is the biggest issue that we have right now. And this is what we need to, you know, that curry that we've got the ingredients, but we can't cook the curry. So that's a key point. And yeah, look, ultimately, we want to be trading with responsible business people, responsible brands, responsible businesses. Because what we see right now is that there's certain circular economies that have hoarded wealth or got their own circular economy where all the leakages are happening from the Muslim economy going into theirs, and they're using that money to hurt us, right? Riba, no doubt, is a tool to suppress the economic might of Muslims. There's no doubt about that, right? You just need to look through the history of what happened with the Ottomans and look at what an Islamic model can do if you look at modern day Andalusia, right? So that the examples are there. We just got to up our game and be conscious enough to park our egos at the door and say, do you know what? I'm gonna develop my relationship with this chap. Even if it's a startup, I want to put my effort behind you and say, I believe in what your principles. You should have a similar mindset to me, similar principles. Just start trading with one another, right? Support your local businesses, right? Support the startups. I think it's encouraging for me to see, especially in my line of work, where I get approached by so many new startups and businesses that have the similar philosophy and principles in terms of countering riba, and I can see in the next 5-10 years an explosion of products and services happening in this space. Our collective responsibility now is to nurture them for the better, right? And one of the fundamental issues that I found in that regard is strategically using our money.
Strategically using?
Strategically using our money. For example, if we, like FIDA is a prime example, right? They've introduced a equity sharing product as opposed to debt, right? Run by genuinely sincere people that are trying to solve a genuine problem in society, right? We should be looking to fund that, right? We really should, because what they're doing, they're helping us. They're helping Muslims get on the property ladder in line with their faith. Whereas all the other products out there, and there are some really other good ones as well, but they're debt-based. Do you see what I mean? Yeah. So what they're doing is more in line with Sharia, and may Allah reward them, because our job is to talk about products and services, from the RFF perspective, is to talk about products and services on merit. We've got some other businesses like Wahid, we've got IFG. We also have CCM, which is offering working capital finance. Fantastic. It didn't exist before. Do you see what I mean? So this brings me nicely onto the RFF. What does the RFF do? So we want to build, we want to harness the riba-free economy, right? A riba-free ecosystem, right? So for that, we need more products and services, right? We need more people to coming to the table. We need a conveyor belt of developing new entrepreneurs and nurturing other people that are going to take on this mantle. Another key proponent of the Jewish circular economy is that they actually teach their children from a very early age not to work for anybody. So they're already developing their money mindset. Do you see what I mean? Imagine taking a child from the age of 6, 7, 8 and saying, we don't want you working for people, we want you developing your own business. People will work for you, you build your own vision. Do you see what I mean? We have a clear direction in the Quran, Al-Furqan, that should shape our spiritual guidance, right? Our economic kind of direction. So we've got everything there. We just got to look. The answers are all in the Quran. Whether we choose to admit it or not, they are all there. The Sunnah is a blueprint for success. When we decide to follow it and chase it, it will lead us to success. That I'm adamant in.
In one line, what's your vision for RFF?
So RFF, so we have 3 main components right now, and I'll go into the other projects that we're currently doing. So number 1, education. Okay, education in what? Economics, finance and money through the lens of riba. We want to upskill. We want to make sure people are more financially literate. We want to make sure people are more financially capable. We're hoping that once they understand financial principles better and what investments are and what to do with your money, etc., they'll make better financial decisions. One example of that, for example, inflation and zakat erodes your wealth, right? Zakat's not really erasing your wealth, it's actually putting more barakah in your wealth, right? By you giving a small proportion away to give the less privileged in life something, right? And in the same process, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving you more barakah for doing that, right? Whereas inflation, your money sat in a bank account is losing value. That money that was $10 was there yesterday is no longer $10. And that's the problem, right? This is why we should have a pro-investment mindset. And a lot of people don't know what investments are, or don't know how to invest their money, or they're very scared to invest. Do you see what I mean? So these are things that we need to teach in terms of, first, the education part, and then upskilling them to make good financial decisions. Do you see what I mean? Number 2 is very, very clear. It is advocating for ihsan. What does ihsan mean? Ihsan means excellence. Excellence in everything we do, right? So, for example, we run a business, okay? Why do we run that business? Is it just to amass wealth? Okay, fine, there's nothing wrong with that. But what's the greater purpose of amassing wealth? To earn the pleasure of Allah, right? To make people's lives better, easier. So, your values and principles, what drives you, how you pay your employees a fair wage. Do you have any adverse impact on society? Do you have any haram income? etc., right? And then it can go further to if you're an Islamic finance business, like what is your Sharia compliance, who's your Sharia scholar, and it's a whole kind of like philosophy on being the best you can possibly be, right? And that in itself is what encapsulated the character of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, because remember, right? He never told a lie. He was an honest tradesperson, right? And people were mesmerized by his character, right? This is how it led to his proposal with Khadija radiallahu anha, right? She was just taken aback by how honest this man was and how hard he worked. So we've got to be the best in what we do, not cheat, not lie, not steal, not try and con someone, not try to bring in low inferior products, etc., right? Got to strive to be the best, and got to make sure that we create a corporate culture within our organization that is the best, where people come to, like this, I love the name, I love Mondays, right? When they come to a Monday and want to come to Monday to go to work, because I enjoy working for this company, right? Because of the culture that they created, and it makes me feel at home, because we spend more time at work than we do at home.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? So it's really, really important. So that's the ihsan, and more importantly, striving for tayyib, right? Wholesome products that are riba free. So that's what we advocate for. Number 3, it's interesting you mentioned amazing, because we're in the process of developing a verified product directory where we actually go in and look at the existing products. So for example, Wahid, Nesta, Kestrel, Simply Ethical, CCM, FIDA, these are just some of the incumbents within our industry. Now some of these people that are grassroots don't know that their products exist. Some of them are more popular than others, right? The point is, one of the first things that RFF did was we looked at the Islamic finance industry, or the ethical and responsible finance industry, and we saw there's a whole group of products there, right? Now, obviously that industry was not serving the grassroots, but conversely, the grassroots don't know there's a whole suite of products, not massive options, but there are products that exist there. So we basically position ourselves right in the middle to be the bridge between industry and grassroots, right? And we want to be a voice for grassroots to articulate to industry that actually the products that you're producing aren't fit for purpose, this is what they want, and then go to industry and say, produce products that actually serve them, and then conversely protect the industry when it needs protecting, because not everything they do is bad, right? There's lots of good things that happen within that industry. There's lots of progress, strides that we've made over the last 20, 30 years. Yes, we know we've got a long way to go, right? But we can only do that collectively with a group vision and working together, right? Because ultimately that's what Allah wants from us.
Yeah.
So when it comes to that product directory, we go in and we vet the business. We know who's the people running it, the CEO, the leadership team, what's their value principles, who's their Sharia scholar, what's their Sharia structure, and then we go through it and say, is it compliant with being riba free? Is it tayyib? And so they're the 3 main kind of core principles that we have for the RFF right now. And obviously, having that privileged position of being in the middle between industry and the grassroots. And what we really, really open to develop, and this is something that has already been promoted within the halal food industry, right, from Euro Quality Lambs, is a tayyib framework, right? A tayyib framework, which will ultimately, what I outlined within the advocacy for ihsan and tayyib, it will actually be a separate entity, a little bit like B Corp. If you're familiar with B Corp, it goes around as impact compliant. You go into a supermarket now, it has the B Corp branding on a can of baked beans or certain products to say that this is compliant, it's ethical, no climate adverse impact, etc., etc. And so we want to do the same thing for a riba-free logo entity. We're going to businesses, just like you see a HMC, HFA logo on the halal chicken shop, the halal logo on a chicken shop. We want to introduce a riba-free logo entity which will go in and audit a business to be riba-free compliant.
Do you have any examples of projects you've worked on or businesses you've worked on to help them become riba-free, or any case studies?
Yeah, I think so. The good news is that the Riba-Free Foundation has just a few weeks back been officially recognised in the eyes of the law as a registered charity, which was a long, arduous process to get to that point. So we're official now, so we can start to do the things. Everything we were doing before was we were being incubated by Euro Quality Foundation, who had taken a leap on us in terms of our vision and our direction and ambition and what we wanted to do. So, we're very grateful to them for taking that confidence in us. And so we can really now, what you'll see going forward is a lot more in terms of direction and propagation of these principles from the RFF officially. Do you see what I mean? So we are producing case studies to highlight these things. Project-wise, yeah, look, we do help provide guidance and nurturing. We put, because at the end of the day, remember, we want to see the ecosystem grow. We want the circular economy to be functioning, and therefore we need more people to come to the table with products and services. So it's our responsibility to nurture those guys. And the reason us being a foundation is because we want to help support them. So we connect them with scholars in terms of Sharia structuring, give our own advice, etc., to help make sure that they are riba-free compliant. And especially when it comes to the Sharia side of the structuring, to promote as is possible with taxation laws and other regulation there may be within the UK country, the UK legislation. We try to help where we can, absolutely, because it's in our benefit. That's why we exist, right? To nurture these businesses.
What kind of products and services are we talking about? Is it generally like Muslim to Muslim businesses, or is it any business in general?
So first principles, obviously, they've got to be riba free, right? And then this is a really good question, actually. I think we sometimes make a grave mistake where we pigeonhole these product services just for Muslims. They're not just for Muslims, they're for everybody, right? Because if they are commercially viable, they make sense, and the principles are aligned, and as long as it financially makes sense for people, then it should be for everyone. And that's where we want to get to, right? And so I think that's also, you've got to consider things like economy of scale, adoption levels, and how that works. And we've got to really get behind these businesses and support them as well. Use them, right? Use them. If we really want to shape this industry, we've got, when a product or service that genuinely comes about solving a genuine problem in society, right? We've got to support them. And I don't think we have done that well enough for the last 20 years, personally.
What are the steps to do that, though? Because I see a massive divide between our generation who are raised and brought up here, and the older generation. And I see a massive divide, not just because of language and culture, but their way of thinking is different simply because a lot of them came from abroad, and again, they're here to survive, whereas we're not here to survive, we're here to build a home and flourish. So that mindset itself has a big difference. I'm not saying it's a negative on either side. So how do you help that with your foundation? Because you have to educate both sides.
So I think this comes on to the point of succession planning. And one thing I'd like to highlight as well, something that we plan to launch through the Riba-Free Foundation, is a Riba-Free coaching program for males and females, right? So we plan to introduce because remember, it's not financial advice because that's a regulated activity, but you can give coaching, right? So we're planning to train people from society, from all walks of life, to become financially literate and understand how to make good decisions with money, and they'll be field-based. So they'll take on learning, for example, right? They will, we're thinking of putting them on a management trainee program, for example, that may last a couple of years. First 6 months is they learn, not just the theory of like learning from a book. We're actually getting industry practitioners to teach them. So for example, when they learn about banking, we get, the best possible bankers that have been in the industry for 20, 30 years to teach them. Not a university lecturer, do you see what I mean? Because we need to give it real life experience, right? And then the year and a half, what they'll do work placements in the various parts of the industry. So they can go and spend 3 months working in CCM, in FIDA, in Wahid, in Nesta. Do you see what I mean? In a conventional bank. Once you start to do that, then you really start to shape someone. Do you see what I mean? And they'll have a much better understanding of how the world works, how finance works, how these institutions operate, the challenges that they face, and they'll be able to plug the gaps. Do you see what I mean? So this is really, really important. Now, whilst that education takes place, you need to be constantly developing talent. And therefore, this is why we have got some of the best practitioners from the industry, not just of Islamic finance, from entrepreneurship, from scholars, to come and teach and give up their time to nurture these people. Because you made a really good point, right? Our elder generation came and did what they did. And the succession planning, unfortunately, that's another place where, people are giving 40% of their wealth to inheritance tax because they're not successively planning, their houses and their wills and their trusts. I mean, the wills, everybody should have a will written. They don't have that. But, succession plan through trusts, protect their assets, protect their properties. We're not just doing that, right? So that's something that needs to be nurtured and learned along the way. You'll find successfully, affluent, rich people, they do that succession planning because they've built all their life earning as well. They're not just going to give it away. So, we've got access to people that can come and teach that. And I think that's a really, really, really important thing to know, because I think if you look at certain dynasties, you look at businesses that have been around for 100 years, they've clearly got their succession planning right. What we can't afford to have is a business that goes through the whole initial startup phase, and that's difficult in itself, get funding, become successful, 20, 30 years, and then dies. That's not helpful, right? We need to make sure from generation to generation, things are getting bigger, stronger. We need to grow wealth, right? And we need the right people to grow wealth. And when the right people grow wealth, we need to circulate it around responsible businesses, around responsible people, and invest in the right people to create problem-solving institutions for society. That's in a nutshell, some of the things that we're hoping to adopt. But look, why we work collaboratively, and our whole ethos is to be the gel to bring everything together, is because we can't do this by ourselves, and no person can. And this is ultimately what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us, is that succession planning, growing wealth, doing it responsibly within the boundaries of your religion. This is what He wants, and we have to do it collectively.
But collectively is the best way, because we are one ummah. We're not one individual, then to another individual. We are one ummah to work collectively. And that's in every single goal of life. And I think a lot of the fractions we have in society, like you mentioned earlier on, there's different masjids within. We'll have one masjid here which doesn't like the other masjid just because of a few beliefs. And that's just on the masjid side. Then we've got businesses don't like each other, Muslim businesses, just for whatever reason. But I think collectively doing things, if two Muslim businesses come together and say, right, we want to do things like this, that's where the synergy comes. That's where 1 + 1 = 3, not 1 + 1 = 2, or even less than 2.
Yeah, I think, look, we've got to know the components of religion correctly. To be honest, I don't really get involved in all the negativity. The DNA of a believer and of a mu'min is always to be positive. Even right now, in terms of what you see happening around the world, is very painful, right? For many of us to witness what's going on. But we've got to realize we all have an individual test and journey back to our Creator, right? He's not going to ask us, what did your government do, or what did your father do, or what did your mother do? He's going to ask you what you did, right? So we need to have a long, hard look at ourselves in the mirror and to ask us that question: what am I doing? What am I doing for my family? What am I doing for my society? What am I doing for my community? Etc. etc. Once we start to have that conversation and stop finger pointing and blaming, we'll move away from this mindset. But it's about developing a positive mindset, which is what a Muslim should have anyway, right? And there's khair in everything that we do, right? So we've got beautiful principles within our religion. We just need to go back to practicing them and incorporating those into our life, and the collaboration will come. I think I'm very optimistic and happy to see that it is starting to happen, right, on certain causes. And I think, anybody that wants to veer down the route of negativity, we just, we say, thank you very much, but we don't want to get involved in this. There's always going to be, I always give the example of Badr, right? There's always going to be a group of sincere people that are willing, with the same principles, to work for the greater good. And that's where we want to bring all that low-hanging fruit together and consolidate that. Because remember, it's not a numbers game, right? A group of sincere people, a small group, can come together to have huge impact on society. Yeah. And I think that's where we should be focusing our energy. I mean, just like yourself, right? You guys do what you can for your local community in terms of your deals and in terms of how you run your business, right? This is a prime example. You probably just want to be meeting with other people that have a business, share similar values and principles. And this is, developing relationships. Don't be disillusioned or discredit how unique and powerful developing relationships are, because, until you develop a relationship with somebody, you don't know what lies ahead. You see what I mean? So this is something else that we do, is we put together events where we bring people together that have these principles to say, look, from a strategic partnership perspective, I know that you, and this is why I'm in a privileged position, because I know a lot of details that I'm not allowed to disclose from certain businesses. And what I will say is, with their permission, say, look, I think if I put you in touch with this person, you've got, for example, a resource in your business, and you may have funding or you may have a database, put it together, and you're already working together. Do you see what I mean? So competition is key, don't get me wrong, and I don't want ever to, we shouldn't eradicate competition. What I'm not saying is like, just put everything together and forget about your respective organizations, because that's not how it works. Competition is key, but on where we can collaborate and have greater strength and effect for the ummah, we must do it. In fact, it's incumbent, right?
Yeah. What's your one tip to businesses who want to become riba-free but they're not?
Oh, that's a very good question and also a very deep question. So, what I would say to businesses that are probably don't have the level, the correct, adequate level of understanding regarding riba, is to go and learn what riba is and what the prohibition is, what's the purpose behind it, what level of impact it has upon society, and then once you learn, try to, as much as possible, right? This is why we exist. We're happy to help in this regard. There's others so the Islamic finance industry, ultimately everybody within that industry should be able to assist in this, right? Helping people move away from riba, right? That's ultimately what they're doing through their products and services. But I think the education on this part is key. And I think if it comes from oneself, from within itself, right? That kind of like decision to learn it themselves is different. But obviously we will promote our courses. I can tell you one thing, that after studying the fiqh of Islamic finance and understanding from first principles with reputable scholar, it gives you a completely different level of perspective. And I'd highly encourage, that's only going to be beneficial. Right? So at the end of the day, there's blessing in learning knowledge, right? And knowledge is power. So, even entrepreneurs, they learn certain pieces of knowledge. There was that famous saying, you got to learn before you earn. You just knock off the L, right? Learn turns into earn. So my one advice would be to upskill your knowledge on what riba free means, not what riba is. First understand riba, how do you become riba free? So for example, one initiative that I would love to see is, us pushing banks to, especially in the charity sector, right, to incorporate a better banking facility for Muslim charities, for example, right? Because from history, they just get shut down overnight for completely the wrong reasons, right? There's a lot of discrimination in that sector. So we need better access to banking facilities. Can we bring 100, 200, 300, 400 businesses together that are responsible and then are happy to go to the bank on their behalf and say, look, I've got 400 businesses here, and we do this. And say, look, give them a product that they're asking for. They've got millions and billions worth of assets in their accounts. Why would you not serve them? Then I think when you create that economic leverage, they will take you seriously. Because I can guarantee you, if the Islamic banks don't do it, the conventional banks will definitely do it.
Yeah.
But that's not what we want. We want to grow our own banks, right? I mean, I'm not going to get into the whole banking conversation, because I think you've got prominent bankers out there working in Islamic finance that can give you a much better perspective into banking. But I think banking's got to up its game as well. But it's difficult for an Islamic bank to be 100% Islamic in nature, because FCA regulation really restricts it being Islamic in nature.
The issue I find with that, and slightly off topic, is finance costs. There's a huge cost in financing, and Islamic banks, their line of credit compared to HSBC is completely different. It's probably 100,000 times lower. So their costs are naturally going to be higher. It's just basic economies of scale. And we've seen Al Rayan Bank pull in their residential products because of affordability, income, whatever it is. And that's something we're going to face until it's probably done globally with the help of UAE, Malaysia, etc. But that's just my 2 pence. Yeah, no,
it's look. We can talk about hours on end in terms of banking and the cost of financing and how cheap and expensive it is. I think there's work to be done there.
If you were to give advice to an Omar Khaliel who's working at Phones for You as yourself now, what would you say to him?
Advice. So that again, another good question. So I think understanding it holistically, right, is everybody makes mistakes. And if there's one thing that I would teach people to do, is don't be afraid of making mistakes, especially as an entrepreneur, because you've got to have real thick skin to be an entrepreneur. You know this, right? You know this yourself, right? It's not hunky-dory. Unfortunately, we live in a highly commercialized environment where everything is endorsed in terms of consumer products, right? You buy this because you need this. We buy things that we do not need, right? So staying within the means is really, really important. But the one thing I would say is that don't be afraid to make mistakes. There's not one route to success. And mistakes is ultimately what makes a successful entrepreneur, because they learn from their mistakes and constantly pivot and rectify. pivot and rectify until they get it right. That's what an entrepreneur does. He doesn't think just like everybody else does. He's unorthodox,
Yeah.
right? And he solves challenges that many others can't because he thinks differently. He has a different perspective. Do you see what I mean? So entrepreneurs are really, really important, critical part of society, and we want to develop more responsible entrepreneurs that are going to serve society whilst also earning money as well. But money shouldn't be the be all and end all and his main objective to get to. Do you see what I mean? Because there's many people out there that have money that, for example, they don't ever need to work for the rest of their life, but how many zeros are you going to keep adding, right?
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? So there's got to be some sort of vision or purpose of how you give back or what your legacy is. I think that's the key point. If you want to leave a legacy, right, don't be afraid to make mistakes, right? So that's probably the one advice I'd give to a lot of entrepreneurs starting out and a lot of youngsters. And I think, you know, as elders, experienced entrepreneurs, it's our job and responsibility to help nurture that gap. So we can help certain people avoid certain pitfalls and mistakes, but not everything, because they need to make mistakes to learn. Do you see what I mean? So, the reason why I say this is because when we go through our academic lifestyle and our schooling career, they teach us there's only one route to success, and that is, go to school, get good grades, go to university, and by the time you come to university, you have an interest-bearing debt. Not everybody has interest-bearing debt, but the point is, there's nothing wrong with that system. There's nothing, it's respectable to get a degree. It's not the only route to success. So don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Where can people find you?
So they can connect with me on LinkedIn, Omar Khaliel. Happy to assist in anything that I can. Also, they can get in touch with us at hello@ribafree.org.uk. Any queries or any requests are most welcome, and someone from myself or someone from the team will reach out to help, inshallah.
And just before we finish, we'll have a quick fire round. Favorite food?
Favorite food? Arab food.
Arab food?
Yeah.
Anything specific?
I like the meats. Generally, I like meat. So I like the Brazilian meat, very, very nice as well. The Arab meat is nice. Maybe the Brazilian meat, yeah.
Okay. Favorite holiday destination?
Holiday destination? Oh, that's a tough one. There's so many. If I had to pick one, I can't say Dubai because I used to live there now, but Maldives maybe.
Nice. Favorite book?
Book, Quran.
Second favorite book?
The Hadith. There's 6 of them. You know what? It's interesting. One skill I wish if I could go back to a former self, I can answer that question now. Go back and tell myself to develop the skill of reading faster, right? Because knowledge is in books. Maybe Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Okay. If you had a superpower, what would it be?
Superpower. Anything that could take me directly to Jannah, I'd go right now. That would be my superpower.
That's the best one. That's the best one we've had so far. And favorite day of the week?
Favorite day of the week? Is this a trick question?
Yeah. There's only one answer to this.
Friday, isn't it, Jummah?
Monday.
Of course, Mondays. I love Mondays.
Jazakallah so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure.
Barakallahu fi, Jazakallah khair. And keep up the hard work and what you're doing and promoting trade and business for the right reasons, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put immense barakah in what you do as a business and your value as a person as well. So barakallahu fi. Thank you so much.